an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Raybearer, chapters 18 through 21. In these chapters, our party has to travel through the bush, and the spirits there are like a lot scarier than I was expecting. It's really bad. This reminded me of like the Hunger Games. It was a lot. And welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh is here in the chat, and she says that she loves my aesthetic. Thank you. I appreciate that deeply. So these chapters, honestly, even though I am totally standing behind saying that it was a lot and I wasn't ready, I will say it ends on a much more optimistic note, this section. And that was a relief because I was feeling super bummed. I've grown to realize how much trouble I have processing like extremely emotionally demanding content outside of work, because I just put so much of that into my work. Like, there's so many things I'm asked to cover that are very like draining in their way. And so it has led to me, when I'm not at work, watching absolute fluff and just nothing that takes any brain power whatsoever most of the time. And I'm starting to worry that the moment that things start to go a little dark in stuff, I start to panic now, because I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. You know what I mean? And this doesn't even go that dark. It's pretty dark, but it definitely had me anxious. And also, of course, there's just the I was in love with this person and now they can't even look at me aspect, which I have said before how difficult it is for me to care about romantic relationships in fiction. And this was it was so well set up. The two characters feel like extremely distinct people, and their attraction to one another makes total sense. So I really care that he starts to be vicious to her. And I was like dreading picking the book up again, because I was like, how am I going to stand it? How am I going to read him just being cold to her after everything? Thankfully, it starts to thaw a little bit, and I'm just hopeful that he'll get over it. It seems like he will, but they've definitely they've arrived at a different place in their relationship. And she says that at one point they're laying next to each other and not touching. And she's thinking about how when they kissed before, they were children, and now they have grown and they're being more honest, which also just complicates things. And you can't come back from that. Once you completely share yourself with somebody, it's a really vulnerable place to be. And if they react badly out of the gate, it's hard that, their focus is always on, well, how can I trust you? You lied to me. But there's also the sense of well, how can I trust you when something that was beyond my control, not my fault, or just an innate part of who I am that can't be helped, caused such a backlash from you that I actually thought you maybe just didn't want anything to do with me anymore. How do you trust somebody who made you think they didn't care anymore and that was all it took? So I really understand, and I kind of like the fact that this author has decided to have them slowly working through it, and things are, like I said, have thawed between the two of them. But she hasn't decided to like turn a corner and make it like they're just back together, or that he just suddenly realizes he was wrong about everything. It's more, later on when everything goes down, that he stops and realizes that the person that he cared about initially is still there. And this is something that I have had some friends who were in like long-term relationships or already married. And they realized that they were non-binary. And one of my friends, when they shared that with their partner, the partner freaked out and really did not react well and acted as if they were a stranger. And it was the kind of thing that they were just like, I'm who I've always been. I'm just asking for different pronouns. It's literally it. And they acted as if I had just taken a mask off and told them that my real name was such and such. And it was really hurtful. And I know that it has sort of like been difficult for them since then. So, there's just this thing here where when they go into the bush, they're both in this really vulnerable place. And we wind up getting to see exactly how these spirits manifest for other people as well. And it's brutal. So I'm going to back up. We're going to talk about chapter 18 first. So what they're first of all doing cleanup because they're all covered in blood. And she's thinking about how Melu is her only hope. Unable to say goodbye, I stole away to my chamber. Clothes lay in piles from last night when my only anxiety had been impressing Sanjeet. There's something so poignant about that for me, because I feel like a lot of us probably have been in that place where we had something in like a plan in mind and things do not go to plan, but there's still the evidence of our faith that it was going to work out somewhere for us to tangibly like stand and look at. And you just have a moment of being like, wow, I really didn't know it was coming at all, did I? It's just a weird thing to realize how at the whim of fate we can be sometimes. So she takes off the cowrie shell anklet, and later on she removes the seal, the ring that she uses, and she puts those both in a bag and brings them to Sanjeet. And he has brought Imperial Guard uniforms. He explains, because she's like, wouldn't just dressing like peasants make us blend in better? And he says, Imperial Guard warriors patrol the valley, changing shifts every 3 hours. If the lady's watching the keep, guard uniforms allow us to leave undetected. We must conceal your absence from Yorua for as long as possible. If the lady knows her weapon has been compromised, she may try to reclaim it. Weapon, I repeated. Is that my name now? It has always been your name, he said, and shut the door flap. Oh, that ripped me up. I really hated that so much. So she comes out dressed and tells him to search her. He balked. I reminded him coolly, I'm a weapon, remember? If you're traveling alone with me, you'd better make sure I'm not armed. And she says, good, now you can be sure I won't run off or stab you while you sleep. I was being unkind. None of this was Sanjeet's fault, and I had no right to be petty about his coldness. Yeah, you do, girl. None of this is fair. I'm not trying to say that this is Sanjeet's fault, but you absolutely can be petty. You have every right. You have been put in an impossible position. And I am 100% fine with you throwing a little attitude at him right now. Because it's a very different thing to hear the words that you've said come out of that person's mouth back at you. Her being like, well, I'm a weapon now. It's the kind of thing that it can seem really like childish in the moment. But honestly, I've had like moments where somebody has repeated something back to me that I said in the heat of the moment. And I wasn't even exactly trying to be cruel. I never really try to be cruel. That's not my goal ever, is to like hurt someone. But nevertheless, when I hear the words out of context from my own brain and think about how they must have come across to them, I truly am like ashamed, you know, or I'll just be like, wow, I really didn't hear the way that sounded. So I have no problem with her redirecting the shit back into his face. Go ahead. He, you know, like, he deserves to hear the way it sounds. It's fine. So this is when she hands over the bag. The first item was my council ring. No guard would let me darken the door of an imperial building. As long as Sanjeet had that ring, I could never return to Yorua. Dio would be safe forever. The second was his mother's anklet. When he saw it, Sanjeet's stone expression shifted. For the first time, his tea-colored eyes met mine. And she sees that this hurts him a little bit, and he just like puts it away. But definitely there's a moment here where it's clear she kind of broke through the crust a little bit. So at this point, he's like, all right, we have to travel to Lodestones, and we'll have to spend a night in the village. So, and she says, yeah, we can't. Like, there's a good chance we're going to run into the lady. We need to travel directly to the Lodestone. And he knows what this means. He stiffened, instinctively touching the curved blade in his halter. So we go through the bush. So the next section, because it's not the start of a new chapter, it's just one of those like little interludes. Every Arit realm has a place like the Oluwan bush. Nyamban people call theirs Shida Shida. Nantish people Trudufe. The Muish name was most direct. Lost Soul Land. Inoba the Perfect had created the bushlands by accident. When he united our realms as one continent, the magic had grown new earth. These enchanted lands, scholars theorized, tempered the climate of our vast continent, allowing for fertile ground in landlocked areas that would otherwise be rendered arid. But the land had also plowed over ancient ocean passages to the underworld, trapping malevolent spirits between this world and the next. Can we just take a second to look at what a cool bit of world building that is? This is wild to me. I've seen a lot of world building, and this just feels really, really fresh to me. There's something about, too, the fact that, like, when he reunited our realms as one continent, the magic had grown new earth. And I'm like, yeah, what exactly did he do? Because I feel like Unoba, whom we are very aware is not perfect, has a lot of baggage and demons and skeletons in his closet. And I feel like this whole, like, oh, trapping malevolent spirits, like, or hear me out, this is on purpose. Or, hear me out, he had, like evil magic somehow mixed in with what he was doing, and that caused some weird side effect. Like, there's just a sort of, the way she talks about it as Tarasai is like, well, you know, it was an unavoidable accident. And I'm like, was it? Was it? I don't know. Doesn't matter. It exists, you know, but nevertheless, I just thought it was interesting. To mortals, bushland appeared no different than any other savanna or forest. A goat herd could wander from pasture to bush pasture without knowing it. Animals were better at sensing the difference, though plenty of cattle, lured by the smell of seductively sweet grass, had vanished overnight. The poor beasts emerged from the bush several days later, half-starved and eyes wide with madness, with fewer limbs, or sometimes more, than they had entered with. Oh my God. What? What? How? What are they doing to these things? What is that even About what? I hated it. Oh my God. Can you imagine? Like you lose a cow and it disappears and then it comes back and it's just got 6 legs now. What would you do? Kill it, right? Just be like, I don't think so. Not today. I wouldn't eat its meat either. Not touching that. So let's see. At present, no monster frightened me more than my own reflection. If it meant avoiding the lady, I would cross every bush in Aritsar. So she's constantly on edge about whether the lady is going to catch up with them. And honestly, I was too. The fact that they were able to sneak out in these Imperial Guard uniforms, I'm willing to believe that this worked, but I would not have been surprised if she had been able to see right through this, considering the level of spying that we've got going on with Kathleen. They could have been in the fucking next room over listening to the plan, you know? Sometimes I saw her, a mirage lounging under a cliff, grinning like a lion at an antelope. When Sanjeet had announced our plan to cross the bush, the guards had inhaled sharply, blessing themselves with the sign of the pelican. But Arit law forbade them from contradicting the anointed ones directly, so they told stories among themselves instead. And we get some fun ones. Oroko, the bush spirit with no stomach. Is he as bad as the bush wife, the spirit that lures infants into lakes? Much worse. Oroko is a spirit that cannot eat, so he forces travelers to eat for him. He lured a peasant and his son into the bush, beguiling them with smells of salt fish and honeyed gari cakes. The son saw a great feast and began to eat. But when he awoke from the trance, was it gari? I am not a liar. The son had eaten his father. Whoa. That is bleak, man. That's fucked up. So they begin to head through, and she has this scarf over her hair. Or no, she has like a dust mask on. And even here, so they're walking in, and Sanjeet, it's suggested that maybe they hold hands so that they don't lose one another, and Sanjeet says no. And she stops him and says, me first, if I'm behind you, how can you make sure I don't run off? Like, she just has to, you know, and I'm here for it, 100%. So, a breeze tickled my face, teasing the strings of my dust mask. Within minutes, the mask came loose, fluttering away. I stumbled after it. Stay by the Kiriwi, Captain Boomy shrilled from across the meadow. I could barely hear her. My fist closed around the mask. It's all right, I called, turning to wave. I've got... My voice died in my throat. The warriors were gone. There is no surer way to make me, like, incredibly creeped out than for something to appear or disappear when it was right there a second ago. Have you guys ever seen The Witch? The Vivitch? There's a moment where she's playing peekaboo, essentially, with a baby. And she's just, you know, covering her face, opening, covering, opening, covering, opening, baby's gone. It was like a millisecond, and the baby disappears. And it's completely physically impossible. And that's what makes it so incredibly creepy, because that baby didn't just, like, leave. Somebody took it. You know, and that's the sense here. Like, all those warriors didn't just walk away. Somebody separated her. That was done on purpose. Ugh. And then she realizes that Sanjeet is here. And I was like, is he? I immediately was like, no, I don't think so. I don't think he's here, girl. And it goes on for a while, with him saying everything that she wishes he would say. And it's so seductive. This is just heartbreaking. I really wonder, if I were to be in a position like this, what it would be that I saw or heard. You know, because it's the sort of thing that when you're in a story and you know the, like, motivations of characters, it's very simple to break down. Like, here's the thing that they regret most that drives them. And as a human being, we have a variety of regrets, of screw-ups. And I genuinely am not sure what it would be. I feel like the one thing that still really bothers me is the way things ended with me and Brendan. So I think probably I might see him and that he would like forgive me and say that we should be friends again. And that's really the closest thing I can think of. And yeah, this whole thing is just, it's so painful because it's subtle. He's not immediately like, hey girl, what's up? He's not acting different out of the gate. There's just a hint of warmth where there wasn't any before, but it was still enough for me to be like disturbed by it. And it continues to basically accelerate. He says something about how, first of all, he's holding her hand and has no problem with it, even though he explicitly refused to do it just like 10 minutes earlier. He says something about how we can find somewhere to sleep. And he says it with this suggestive sort of like, and we walked for what felt like an hour. I'm desperate to know how long this actually was, because everything is fake. So it could feel like it was an hour and it was like 2 minutes, or it could have been a full day. And he's humming a lullaby from one of her maids at Bikina House. That's from Swana, I mumbled, feeling warm and sluggish. I didn't know you knew Swana songs. Another moment of me just being like, uh-huh. He would have sung that around you. He would have done it if he knew it, And she says, I don't understand, as he says, like, his tone gently suggestive, or not. What happened last night wasn't your fault. I see that now. Your mother forced you to hurt Dio. You had no say in it. I'm sorry for saying those cruel things. You're nothing like the lady. Nothing you said was wrong, I faltered. I am the lady's daughter, and I chose to join the council, even though I knew it would put Dio in danger. It wasn't your fault, he insisted. Slowly, my muscles relaxed. He unwound the turban of my disguise, letting my braids spill heavily over my back. You did nothing wrong. There is no reason to feel guilty. And he says, come into the cave. And all of a sudden, she's like, wait. And kind of comes out of it. Because there's a moment where she truly, like, completely relaxes into his embrace and is like, oh, well, thank God. And she says, Sanjeet of Derma would never lie to make me feel better. What are you? The person froze. Then it, smiled with Sanjeet's face. The bush spirit distorted, body rippling as it melted into acrid fog that billowed around me. I couldn't move, couldn't see. Ghostly laughter shook the corkwood trees. Creepy. I love this. I love that it disappears without actually saying anything to her. I kind of thought we were going to get like a bit of a back and forth, like a Loki sort of moment, And the fact that it doesn't say anything makes it seem so much more sinister to me. Like it's not interested in a tete-a-tete. It's just trying to fuck with you. And if it failed, then it's just going to move on and find a new way to do it. And she is wondering what exactly is in the cave. Like, what's the end game that they're trying for here? And she's realizing that she is still heading toward the cave, even though the spirit disappeared and she broke through the actual illusion. There's a force behind it that's remaining. And before long, the push toward the cave returned. I threw myself again. I was tiring. I would never keep this up for long. Give in, the spirit murmured, still using Sanjeet's voice. You would be safer with us. Dio would be safer. Don't be selfish, killer girl. And then a new voice echoed from the ground, vibrating in my limbs as though it had traveled through thick layers of dust and leather. But it wasn't someone. It was Ayatoro's drum, strapped to my back, pounding of its own accord. The meaning of each pitch came together in my mind. Stone, stone, vine-covered stone. I peered wildly through the mist. There, between two trees, a rock lay covered in vines, and in its shadow, a kiriwi bush. And as she starts heading toward it, the illusion begins to grow more and more transparent and start to fall away. And eventually, the pull that's dragging her toward the cave also goes away. The circle of trees and bush spirit were gone, but the cave remained. That ominous place had not been an illusion. So I don't remember. I think that it's been mentioned earlier that the kiriwi is like an anti-spirit kind of herb or something. But let's see. I walked so close to the fragrant bushes, their branches scraped my sore legs. And she's thinking about what's happening to everybody else who's traveling through the bush. Like, did Sanjeet get caught up? And all of a sudden, she starts getting like these murmurs from around her. Like there are people just out of sight that she can't see. Tar, is that you? It is. It's Tarasai. We've been looking ever since you left the keep. We don't blame you about Dio, Tar. We know it wasn't your fault. Come home. When I said in the intro that it had Hunger Games vibes, I don't know if you guys remember, but in the second book, there are these birds that scream, and the scream is the scream of somebody that is very close to each of the competitors. And it's just the kind of thing that like lures you into the woods because you're trying to help and save them. And then there will be a trap laid. And it really kept on giving me that sort of vibe. Also, there's a really creepy, those of you who are patrons, I do usually at this time of year. I'm not doing it this year because of the wedding and having so many other things going on because of that. But I usually do Unspooked at this time of year. And there was one episode that I recorded that was a lot of stuff about a parks and I can't remember the name of the other, but they were like a rescue ranger. But they were drawn to this area because they kept hearing a child crying, and kids got lost in this park all the time. They worked in like one of the national parks, like Yellowstone or something. And they head towards the sound trying to find the kid. And all of a sudden, both of them register at the same time that there's the same little hiccup beat. And then the crying starts again. And that it's not a child, it's a recording. And it's just repeating. And both of them like look at each other as it finally dawns on them, like, what the fuck? And they just book it out of there. And don't know what that was about, or if it's even a true story, but it definitely like got me all like chilled. I hated that idea. The whole idea of something being able to mimic people you love is just harrowing because it would work on most of us. Even when somebody's acting weird, you just think they're acting weird. Maybe they're drunk. Maybe they're stoned. Maybe they're depressed. They're just in a bad mood today. Who knows? We would probably follow a lot of people without really thinking twice about it. So she hears Sanjeet laughing, and she hears the clack of practice weapons. And I was like, oh no, this is going to be his brother. And sure enough, she steps into this illusion, and she takes a minute, looks around, steps back again. It disappears, steps forward, and is just like, wow. But it has its tells. There are things that have no shadow. There are people that are wrestling, but they're not making any imprints on the sand at all. It's very clear that none of these like alleged objects or people are actually interacting with their environment. And it reminds me of like a really poorly done video game, you know? And she tries to call out to Jeet, and he starts to turn, and the spirit tells him, follow my voice. It's all an illusion. Or no, she says, follow my voice. It's all an illusion. And the spirit says, careful of ghosts, brother. We lose rookies every time we cross the bush. Spirits always imitate people you know. And she gets so mad, which 100% I would too. Like, there is nothing like somebody convincing a person that you are doing the thing they're actually doing. I have been on the receiving end of that like twice, and it's the most infuriating thing because all you can do is say, "Nah, no, that's what they're doing." And it sounds so childish, even if it's 100% true. There's just, you know, that when somebody decides to like come at you that way, they know they're putting you at a disadvantage because defending yourself simultaneously undermines you and makes you like feel foolish. And finally, he's like, I know it's really hot out, but there's a place to cool off over the hill. And they head out, and she has to run to catch up and find Sanjeet standing at the edge of this pool. And his brother is in the water, trying to get him to come in. I can't see the bottom, said Sanjeet. His words sounded slurred, suspended between wake and sleep. And he starts to take a step, and Tarasai manages to stop him. But again, his brother is arguing, no, she's a spirit. And she has fistfuls of the kiriwi. And let's see, the spirit then does something that is incredibly smart, actually. It pretends it's drowning so that it ups the like urgency for him to jump in the water after it. And I couldn't even be mad. Like, that was a good idea. I was, again, very creepy. It was then I noticed an item on the ground nestled with Sanjeet's abandoned clothing, the pouch containing my imperial seal. And the voices tell her, take it and return to the keep. And as she's considering, you can't save Sanjeet, but you can save yourself, and you can go back, and Sanjeet won't ever forgive you anyway, so you may as well wash your hands of this. The spirit is telling him, I called for you and you didn't come, but don't feel bad, brother. It wasn't your fault. There's nothing to forgive. I know you didn't really abandon me. You're nothing like father. You would never leave me to fend for and then it acts like it just got pulled under. So what Tarasai does to snap him out of it is she tells him the truth about himself here for a sec. You once told me that Santil never lies, I said in a rush. I didn't want to continue. I hated to be cruel, but I had no choice. Your brother wouldn't deny that you abandoned him, Jeet, because you did. You agreed with your father. Mercenaries took Sandil because you didn't protect him. Sanjeet froze. Firmly, I cupped his face and searched his mind for memories of the real Sandil, drawing them painfully to the surface. Lies will never set us free, Jeet. Then I tossed a handful of kiriwi into the pool. The spirit shrieked, the pool turned chalky white, the water rippled, and in its place yawned a fathomless pit. I immediately felt that pull, that malevolent hunger for souls and living blood. Run, I said. Yo. I just hate it so much. God. And at this point, this is when Jeet starts to come around a little bit. You had your seal. You could have gone back and left me to die. You stayed. And she says even monsters can surprise you. And he obviously feels it and says, don't call yourself that. And she's like, I'm barely calling, like, you're the one who called me that. And he apologizes. and says, you didn't deserve that. You aren't the lady. You didn't want to kill Dio. And she corrects him, which I found really surprising and interesting. She says, part of me did. When I attacked him, I felt numb, but I also felt right, like I was fixing a mistake that shouldn't have been made. There was an anger in my blood that had to be satisfied. You didn't choose to feel that way. Does it matter? It's still me. I was pacing now, determined to have it out at last. For years, I told myself I was nothing like the lady, that I would never be her, but my mother is part of me, Jeet, just like your father is part of you. It isn't fair. We didn't deserve the burdens our parents gave us, but we can't defeat monsters we won't face. I thought I could forget, if I buried it deep enough that her wish would disappear. But if I'd been honest with myself, Dio would have been safe. I never would have joined the council. And this is just one of those moments where, you know, obviously the symbolism of the sins of the father, you know, that kind of thing. I think all of us have these moments, you know, where we realize there's like a really decent episode of Friends. I don't love that show, but there's one where Rachel is getting really super competitive and she's got a teammate that I think is Joey on whatever it is they're trying to do. And she gets aggressive because Joey isn't like holding up his end of things the way she thinks he should. And she kind of screams at him and he calls her out and she stops dead and goes, "Oh my God, I'm my father. I was so busy trying not to become my mother that I did not see that coming." And I really felt that shit, man. I you know, like in my soul. We can't help it to a degree. And that's what's so like insidious about what this author's chosen to do with having her be like literally a piece of her mother, like her saying, "You are me." It's unclear. Like I said before, that it's not like she can look through Tarasai's eyes. So she's not literally an actual exact part of her. But there's a link that just you can't help, that can't be denied. And whatever is in you, you just have to learn how to cope with it and like work with it. But if you just try to bury things, they don't really stay buried ever. There'll be little seismic shifts on the surface and you're going to be like, "That's weird. Where's that coming from?" And it's the thing that you buried that you're trying to pretend isn't still there. And it's shaking, desperately trying to get you to like come and dig it up because this isn't good. So this whole thing, like the you know, a woman who feels like everything that her mother has put on her doesn't even have anything to do with her. And yet she still has to cope with it. That feels very real to me. You know, I know that there are different reasons behind why people have children. And this is part of why I don't want to have kids, because I don't trust my own motivations on that. But there are definitely parents who, whether they realize it or not, they have kids because they're hoping that they can retroactively fix the mistakes they made in their own life. And, or that their child will be a stepping stone to something else. That's the one that I find the saddest, because it's like putting the weight of the future of the family on them. But I have seen it before, and it's just a really ugly thing to watch from the outside, because the child will simultaneously resent this being put on them, and they'll know it's happening. But they also feel guilty, like they were given so much that they have no right to refuse to help, or, you know, just they feel like it's their duty and obligation, and they wind up being used or taken advantage of a lot of the time. And I just felt so much for her in this scene. I really hate this. So Sanjeet counters her with, "I would have stayed chained to that pillar in the children's palace. I would be the prince's bear with a rat's skull as a token instead of a cowrie shell." His voice was soft, and he appeared to consider taking my hand, just like Spirit Sanjeet had, but instead we remained apart, staring at each other as if scouring mire from glass. I really like that line. You had enough faith in me to cross a fire pit. For everyone's sake, have that faith in yourself. And then we start chapter 20. We stumbled through 3 more false landscapes before we reached the end of the bush. The illusions had been made for Captain Bunmi and her 4 warriors, who had leapt into the bush impulsively after seeing me disappear. And they keep eating this plant, and they're feeling kind of sick because they have to keep eating it in order to see through this stuff. But there is this... This is awful. We found Captain Bunmi in a quiet field surrounded by the bodies of dead Imperial warriors. None of the corpses were real. And this, let's see. I could tell from the blood, which was too lurid. The captain sobbed on her knees, screaming the names of her comrades. I killed them. They looked like enemies at first, and then they changed. The bush tricked me. She clawed at her head, desperate to expel the images lodged there. And they have to convince her the warriors are okay. You didn't do this. We rescued 3 more warriors. The 3rd we found brandishing a spear over a lifeless body. The beguiled warrior had pierced the 4th remaining warrior, a woman named Awofeso, through the heart. The bush had tricked him into seeing a wild beast. When his vision cleared, he began to tremble, yelling, then whispering her name. He continued to ask for her even when we reached the end of the path. The warrior's lips continued to shape that name over and over, until at last I brushed his temples, plucking the memory of his comrade's mangled body from his mind. He stilled, sighed, and fell fitfully asleep. That is so brutal. Can you imagine being tricked into killing somebody that, like, oh my God, you would never get over it. Never, never. And I like that she doesn't try and, like, take away the entire memory of what happened. She can't do that. It's not fair. It's not smart. It's certainly not her right. But she just tries to take the edge off, which I can appreciate. The children who kissed at the sea, this is the thing I was talking about, were gone. We were different people now, more jaded and honest. If I touched him that way again, I would be making a promise that I had no power to keep. How could I swear to love anyone when the lady still held my puppet strings? And that was a point that I didn't really consider. I was just like, can't you guys kiss and make up and be happy again? But knowing that this woman can snap her fingers and make you do a thing, how can you ever let yourself get close to anybody? Yeah, no, that sucks. When we said our goodbyes to the Imperial Guard warriors the next morning, their faces shone with grave new respect. If you had left the bush without rescuing my warriors, no one would have blamed you, said Bunmi. You are Aritsar's future. Your lives must be preserved. But you came back. She squinted and locked her jaw, restraining tears. I will never forget what you did, and neither will any of my comrades. The Imperial Guard shall always be loyal to Tarasai of Swana and Sanjeet of Dirma. For the first time in many moons, I smile for the future of Aritsar. And this should be a moment where Tarasai is like, oh, rad, great, thanks. But instead, as she's walking away, she's like, for the first time in many moons, she's a captain in the Imperial Guard, and she is not, like, excited about the future. That seems bad. And I'm like, yeah, doesn't it though? So they head for the first lodestone. And there's this weird moment where they're about to step onto it to travel, and somebody comes through before they can, and they have to, like, sort of make room, like people getting off a subway car before you can get on. A cohort of Imperial militia burst into view from thin air. "No time to waste," the captain shouted to his comrades, stepping off the lodestone and shrugging off the nausea. He flashed his identification at the guards. "We may have captured the abomination, but her servants still lurk in the Empire. They were last spotted not far from—" His voice trailed off as the cohort left the port, running in formation. When he says the abomination and her servants, I mean, the abomination is female. I'm, of course, thinking he's talking about Tarasai, but they have not captured her. Then I'm like, are these people actually Imperial, like, or are they disguised? Is this Kathleen? And just the whole energy, like, would the lady have made more than one child to carry out her will? Is there like another one out there? Is the lady herself considered an abomination and they captured her? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't even have theories, you know? So they take the lodestone and they start heading towards the city center in Kofi-on River. Enjoy your stay in Nyamba, Anointed Honors. As they walk into the city, people are flipping out, and there's this huge bonfire. And Tarasai realizes that they are collecting all these griot drums and scrolls of stories, and they are just burning them. And she kind of loses it. And she is thinking about, like, later on when they get into their room, Thaddeus had made the Unity Edict sound so reasonable. He had been right that disunity at Ebujo had been disastrous. If the realms had only put aside their differences and worked together, fewer people would have died. But, like, this is not how you encourage unity. That's just all it is. Like, yeah, you're correct. And I really appreciate her getting to see this implemented and what this is really like. And again, reminder, this happened. We did this. It's 100% we did this to Native Americans. But by we I mean white people. The British are especially guilty because they were the ones who started off with this whole conquest bullshit. Well, they didn't start off, but they got the most aggressive, I would say, and stayed aggressive longer. They went into native areas and forced them to convert and took away all of their, like, native religious artifacts and plundered their temples and dug up their loved ones and stole relics from their graves. Like, and recently, guys, like, I need you to remember how there was a post that I saw recently. I'm trying to remember where I saw it, where this person had gone to a museum, and they were Kiwi, and they were with their mother, and their mother was, like, seeing things in the displays at the museum, and she was like, "Oh, Joanne made that. I remember when she made that." And it was just all of the shit that in her mother's memory, she was alive, for when people came to her town and took shit. And there was even a display of stuff that had been in somebody's grave. And it was like the body was returned to the family to be reburied. So basically they dug up a dead loved one, stole everything they were buried with, stripped the body clean, and then mailed that bare body back to the family and just kept everything. And it's considered completely, like, legit. It's disgusting. And, like, it's truly just shocking. Every time I stop and think about how not only did this happen, but it's still happening. And we act like, well, you know, that's how it is. Like, yeah. Yep. So this is when they stay here a week. They cross over finally to Swana. And when they get there, she's having a really hard time. She's like, first of all, vomiting because they have the lodestone sickness and she's not doing well. But secondly, she kind of gets this like overwhelming sense of, oh, fuck, I'm in her territory now. Like this is getting very close. And I am going to be able to look around and see the place that I like grew up, and the trauma will all just come flooding back. And Sanjeet crouches and says, your home realm is beautiful. It's just like the memories you used to show me, said Sanjeet, sounding almost shy. A copse of slender acacia trees and vibrant green grass surrounded us. The air was sweet with honeysuckle and winked with whirls of lavender light. Tutsu sprites, I whispered. I haven't seen them since I was small. Those only exist where the land is especially fertile, said the Swana port guard, standing straighter with pride. I really enjoy this moment. So they head in and they come across this caravan of people who are singing a song. And as soon as they see these two in their guard outfits, everybody clams up and is like, we don't have any griots, drums, we don't have scrolls, they've checked already. And this guy is like, you can take a look at what's, on our little wagon here. Thankfully, native clothing was not illegal under Thaddeus's edict, but how long until this merchant's sales dwindled? How long until villagers and townspeople bowed to the pressure of empire cloth? And this is the sort of thing, again, that it doesn't seem that terrible from the outside. Just like, so people are upgrading their clothes and getting a different, even just using the term upgrading is highly questionable. But it's the loss of the tradition. There's an art that goes into making things a certain way. There's a history. There is a carrying on of a legacy of thousands of years, potentially. And if it's stamped out in a certain way, nothing remains of it. It's not even like, we don't really make that fabric anymore, but here's how you could if you wanted to. The very means by which you make it can be stamped out. That can be seen as a threat in its way too. And she just blurts out, we'd like to buy your whole stock. And she hands him 3 gold coins. And the guy is like, look, I really appreciate it, but that's more than double what I would be actually getting. That's not even more than double what he'd be getting for this. More than double what he gets in a year. And she says, 2 golds for the stock, the rest for you to finish your journey and give the clothes away for free at the market. Color the whole town in your beautiful fabric. And I really loved this. That's just so beautiful. I love it so much. And then this other woman is pregnant and she's deciding between an imperial name or a traditional name. I want to name him Bopelo after his grandfather, but Togoso thinks Overcomer or Peacemaker would be best. Good Erit names, he says, meanings that everyone can understand. And they get money if they do that, if they name him an empire name. And she is genuinely tempted because she wants to educate her kid. So part of her is kind of and there's just so much of this is just exactly true how it went, and this is part of why the ignorance around white people mispronouncing certain names, or there's a lot of racism around names that are African names that are seen as ghetto in quotes. And I should have looked up specific examples, but there are names for example, Shaniqua. And that's one of those that people will use as an example of like a really tacky ghetto name. And it turns out that like in another language, it means light of God. But do they care or know that? No, because they didn't educate themselves about it. So the fact that people have this urge to name their kids something that everybody will understand, that it's like, yeah, well, we could name her Shaniqua, or we could name her Sarah. And she'd probably have an easier time if she was named Sarah. I can't help but understand why you would want to do that for your kid. You know what kind of advantage they're going to get just based on a name. But then you're sacrificing something also, and you have to decide whether it's worth it. And it's just gross. So she gives this woman another coin and tells her for Bapelo, I think Tegoso will come around. So she's basically like, don't worry about paying for his future. Here's the money. Name him what the fuck you wanted to name him. And just don't you wish you had this kind of money to throw around and fix people's problems? And Kia fussed maternally over my yarn-plaited hair, admiring the gold accents, but gasping at the roots. So tight! This is how fancy ladies are wearing braids in Oluwan? Cutting off the air to their brains? I shrugged. I don't mind. Doesn't it hurt? Only when I think about it. It's better this way. Everything's under control. And this is what she, finally faces down a little bit later. So they're told to go see Old Mongwe. She helps travelers. It's the duty of her holy order, the priests of the clay. If she cannot find Melu, she can at least settle your stomachs. I suspect most imperial warriors do not have such refined accents, nor do they carry purses full of gold coins, but I will not ask your true names. Go well. If ever you pass through Piquet village, know you have a friend in Tegoso. He gave me 3 bangles and a cobalt blue blouse and wrapper dyed with yellow stars. Doesn't that sound beautiful? I really want to see this. And Sanjeet gets a tunic in the same fabric, so they're going to be wearing a matching outfit. And I'm just like, yeah, you will. So they head towards this smoke that's rising from behind a farmhouse, and this woman yells out and is like, yeah, are you gonna just stand there, or are you coming in? And at first I thought what it was going to be was that she could see the future, or she could get a sense of people coming towards her house, but it turns out that these Tutsu sprites are informants, basically. They go all over the place and just tell her everything that's happening in the town, which that is delightful. I really enjoy that a lot. So she offers them each a cup of tea that really does almost instantly settle their stomachs. And she has this moment that I really felt in my guts. She's talking about these chattermouths love stray adventurers. All day they whine. Mongwe, a boy is on the road taking a magic cow to market. Mongwe, a dairymaid, is running away to be with her true love. Mongwe, a Wuraola, I think I'm saying that right, and her friend have come to seek an Eru. There's a word for what Tarasai is, evidently. A Wuraola. What does that mean? Does that matter? I'm very curious. You're all the same, young people, full of questions and deaf to ugly answers. Leaving your safe homes, your warm beds, because, let me guess, you want to follow your heart. Should a fool follow his heart? A thief? A murderer? Your heart is not your friend unless you know who you truly are. Yo. Your heart is not your friend unless you know who you truly are. That is a whole fucking sermon. I stopped dead when I read that and was like, shit. So she basically they ask, like, can you tell us where he is? And she's like, I don't know where Melu is. You can ask the sprites, but they kind of are moody about who they help. And she says, you smell like a frightened hare. Perhaps you should bathe first. We don't have time, I said, standing. Tell us where to go. So she heads out there by herself. She makes Sanjeet stay behind. And the Tutsu are like mocking in their way they receive her. And she can tell that it's because like she just looks like shit. And she asks them, like, if I can break the lady's hold, Melu will be free too. Don't you care about him? It says, I yelled and pleaded. I insulted. I even threatened to trap them in jars like the merchants who sold sprites in markets. But nothing worked. The Tutsu ignored me. Hot-faced, I stomped back to Sanjeet. It was worth a try, he said. We can find Melu's pool another way. So they go back and Mongwe is like, she says, people never listen to what you want. They listen to who you are. The Tutsu are chanting about you. They say there's someone you are desperate not to hurt. They think your case is hopeless for the most part, though the gem that he carries will help. And he pulls the sunstone out of his pocket. And she sort of takes it the wrong way. Tarasai is like, maybe the stone can cure me. And Mowgli is like, no, that's not what I mean. Sunstones strengthen the will in some. If you're tempted to do harm, it won't protect you, but it may make it easier to resist. So Sanjeet puts it around her throat. And then Mongwe says, now doesn't a bath sound nice? And this is a very significant moment. Tarasai goes and she's like really enjoying the bath, but she's trying really hard not to get her hair wet. And all of a sudden she realizes like her scalp is itching. It hurts. She feels grimy and dirty. And that is like, there's nothing like when your scalp feels like gross. I mentioned before that unfortunately I got braids once when I was in Honduras, and like I still remember how gross my scalp felt after a little while, and it was a relief to take them out. And even just having really curly hair and the skin type that I have, really oily very quickly. It's nasty. And also, my hair can be high maintenance, so I will resist washing it, not because of any particular pressure like she is, but just because it's a pain in the ass and I just don't want to deal with it. So this moment of her like trying to keep her hair dry and then finally being like, you know what, fuck it. I was like, yeah, I can relate. And she plunges her head in. A bubbled sigh escaped my lips as my roots soaked up the water. I could feel the yarn frizz, curls escaping the tightly coiffed edges. Unruly, the palace braider fretted in my ear. Shameful. Think of your title. Ladies rein in every strand into place. And I lathered my scalp and dunked the braids again, letting the suds froth around my ears. And I was thinking, like, is she going to undo the braids? But doing that takes a long time. So I was kind of, like, not surprised that she didn't do that here, because it is just, you know. And when she gets out, she thinks about wearing the Imperial Guard outfit. And then she's like, And she puts on the starry blue dress with the wrapper. And when she steps out, he is also wearing the kaftan in the same fabric. So she stumps back out to the Tutsu. You don't have to help me, but you will listen when I speak, because there's no history I cannot see. I am Tarasai of Swana, and I've seen your stories now. They belong to me as mine belong to you. You don't have to help me change the world, but you mark my words, when I get going, this world will change. And you can be a part of that, or you can stand back and watch. and they swarm at her. And she has this panicked moment, as does Sanjeet. And all of a sudden, they like lift her into the ground as they swarm around her and begin pulling at the yarn in her hair. And they undo all of these braids until there was nothing left but my midnight cloud of hair, unbound and unyielding, bursting from my scalp in a dark halo. I love this moment. The Tutsu set me down at last and then hovered at a distance, waiting for orders. I glanced back at Sanjeet. Mongwe had joined him at the field's edge, arms crossed. "Well now," she said placidly, "didn't I tell you a bath would help?" And that is the end of the chapter. And what a great ending to the chapter. I loved it so much. So, I am very excited. I can't wait to see what happens next. I'm enjoying this book so much. So I'm over time. I better wrap. But thank you again, Ashleigh, for commissioning this. I'll see you all on Friday. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.